Hi everybody, welcome back to the Cutting Edge Garage. It's been a while since we've done something in the garage. We sold our old building, had to build a new garage, new facilities. First new video that we've done since the new garage has been completed. This will be a short episode dedicated specifically to the DIY guys. Our graphic designer Braxton had his vehicle in. We need to do some spark plugs. We're going to go through what you need to do to make sure that you're doing this right. And then at the same time, he has a problem going on with one of the CV axles. We're going to swap out the axles. So thanks for taking the time to join us. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and disconnect the electrical harness that goes to the ignition coils. As you can see in the video, those harnesses, the lock tabs on there can get stuck. Take your time, don't rush it. You don't want to break the lock tabs. They're the safety locks to make sure that that lock or that harness stays connected to the ignition coil. You can use a pick like I did, small screwdriver, pocket screwdriver works great. You want to get that clip to release and then slide that electrical harness back without doing any damage. Next, we're going to go ahead and zip out the 10mm bolts that hold these coils in. So a couple things we want to take a look at once we get the coils out. We want to take a look. We want to make sure that there's no oil residue anywhere on here. These coils go straight down through the valve cover, and there's O-rings on the bottom side of that valve cover. So if there's any leaking going on with those O-rings, you can get oil dripping down onto the stems and the boots of the coil. So you want to make sure, and we're good here, there's no signs of any leaking. Vehicle only has 60,000 miles on it, so it looks like everything's good to go. We don't have any issues. We can go ahead and take the spark plugs out. Now, before we talk about what you should be looking at on the spark plug itself, I also want to talk about how we get those out. As you can see, I've got a spark plug socket that has a rubber retainer in it, so it's going to hold that plug in place as I pull it up out of the hole. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. So for example, I can just set this plug back down in the hole. Once it's loose, I can just take the ignition coil, stick it on there. That rubber boot will grab the plug and let me pull it out. Another way to do that is with a small piece of hose. Working on this 4-cylinder Honda engine, it's pretty much straightforward. But if you're working on a transverse V6 or a V8 engine, getting to some of the back spark plug holes can be difficult. Both getting them out and putting them back in. So having a flexible piece of hose that allows you to get in there on an odd angle is something good to have in your toolbox. Now I'm sure some of you guys are thinking, why doesn't he just use one of those power tools he's got sitting on his cart? I have never used a power tool to take spark plugs out nor put them in, and it's a bad idea, and I strongly recommend that you don't use that either.
The answer is never. Do you hear me? Never, ever!
You can very easily strip the threads in the head, and you're going to create a lot more headaches for yourself than the few seconds you save by using a power tool. A couple things we want to look for once the plugs are out. We want to look for irregular wear. We also want to pay attention to the electrode itself. We want to find out or take a look and see if there's any oil or antifreeze residue on there, which could be an indicator of another problem. This is a maintenance tune-up. We're putting these plugs in strictly based off of mileage. So one thing that I will point out, and it's unique to this particular spark plug that came from the #1 spark plug hole, right here, let me grab something to show you. It's going to be hard to see in that camera, but if you look at this side of the spark plug just a little bit, it's more worn than the other side. Okay, and that's not necessarily uncommon. I just wanted to point it out. These are the things that we want to be looking at. This is burning this side of the ground a little bit hotter than it's burning on the other side. Again, we're only replacing these plugs due to maintenance, so it's not that big of a deal. Now, a couple things to be mindful of when you're putting the spark plugs back in. These plugs came in a 4-pack box. It's not unlike NGK and several other spark plug manufacturers to sell a multi-pack of plugs to the parts suppliers. And they're usually housed in a piece of styrofoam when they're sold like that. AC Delco plugs are sold that way, very common. So you may end up with just 4 plugs or 6 plugs, whatever the case may be. You want to make sure that there's nothing inside this air gap between the electrode and the ground. If there is, it can cause a drivability issue that you're going to have to look at later. So again, you're going to want to make sure that you do that. A guaranteed way of not having to worry about that is to make sure that you actually gap the spark plugs or check the gap to make sure that they are exactly what the car calls for. Honda used to be, and a lot of manufacturers used to be kind enough to put the spark plug gap on the emission sticker. It's not on this. We do have access to professional repair information that we use in tech support and other things. But being the DIY, again, this video being dedicated specifically to the DIY crowd, make sure that you look this information up. You can Google it, probably more than likely be able to find the information that you need. But you can also just ask the parts store while you're there getting your parts. They can look up the spark plug gap for you and give it to you. So we want to check the gap, make sure that the gap is right on the spark plugs. Now, when you're putting in iridium plugs, there's no need to adjust the gap. They should come out of the box ready to go. That said, you still want to check it, make sure the clearance is there. And the reason is, if someone dropped this spark plug inside of this little box, it can still bend that ground over and close the gap on that plug. So you just want to make sure you're not going to adjust it. You're just going to go in. We're just going to slide up. And we're right where we should be. Now, we double checked the proper gap using our information, but like I said earlier, you can always check with the parts supply house, and you can always check with forums, Honda forums. I believe Braxton found something on one of the Honda forums that had the spark plug gap as well. Now, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of anti-seize. We're going to be using dielectric grease too, so I'm going to save myself a little bit of time and go ahead and cut that one as well. So we're going to add just a little bit of anti-seize to these threads. The reason that we're doing that, we want to make sure that the plugs don't seize inside the head. You want to make sure that the plugs are snug and tight, but you don't want to kill it either. Again, these spark plugs are going down inside the cylinder head, so we don't want to damage the threads down in there. All right, now we're going to go ahead and put our coils back in. But before we do, we're going to take just a tiny bit of dielectric grease. And what this is going to do is help keep that boot from seizing on the spark plug itself. Apparently I didn't cut it enough. Always start your bolts by hand. Make sure that you're not running the risk of cross-threading anything. Now we're going to go ahead and reconnect our electrical harness to each individual coil. And that's it. Spark plugs are changed. Nice and easy. It probably took us longer to do this video than it would for you to do your spark plugs on your car. Make sure that you check back with us soon at the Cutting Edge Garage. We've got a lot of exciting things coming up in the future, including our Holden Ute build. Details coming soon. Thanks again.